I've had many odd jobs, but one of the most interesting was working for a tax company in Texas. I was living in Kentucky, my home state at the time, but because this company outsourced work remotely, I was able to make a good living doing tasks that were usually very simple. I had a work partner, but not all the time, and it was our job to travel all over the eastern and central parts of the state to the PVA district court offices. You may not have them, but that's a small town thing, and research delinquent property taxes. We were then required to make a list of the property that had delinquent taxes and submit it to our boss. She was our primary contact in Texas. This part is also important because it was the only reason we sometimes had to deal with hostile people. The company will then buy the taxes if the property tickles their fancy, and the property owner will be issued a letter stating that they have a certain amount of time to repay the amount. I'm not sure what would have happened after that since it wasn't part of my job, but I do know that people immediately assumed, due to their lack of knowledge or understanding of the law, that this company was going to take their property and throw them out on the street. However, before the company bought the taxes, they would send us a reserve list of the ones they were interested in, and we would then go out and photograph the property and then send all the pictures to our contacts in Texas. And here everything became interesting. Honestly, it was like the property owners just sensed us with some kind of psychic intuition. They had no idea who we were or when we would arrive, as they were working practically on their own schedule. They didn't know what color car we would be in, but for some reason they often burst out the door when we stopped to take pictures of the place. It's made for interesting and often scary confrontations. However, once I got the hang of it, I even came up with a convincing story to tell the angry property owners as they chased us in their car. I would tell them that we are from the County Property Assessment Office, we are just updating our property files, and we need a current photo. This often reduced the atmosphere, and they apologized for threatening our lives, and sometimes running us off the road to force us to stop. I have many stories from this job, but here is the best one. So one day we were in the hills of eastern Kentucky, desperately looking for the only wide trailer on our list. We found a hollow that matched our direction. This is before the days of GPS. We had to use actual county maps and all that, and we took a risk. As we got closer to the creek, the houses started to get farther and farther apart, and soon we were completely isolated. Nothing but trees and a narrow gravel road when suddenly we spotted a trailer. It was nothing like the PVA picture. Clearly, time has taken a serious toll on this place. Some of you may not realize this depending on where you come from, but in my home state, one gets used to the look and feel of a potential drug manufacturing site. I know it might not make a lot of sense, but trust me, we knew right away that this place was prime location for the method lab. We didn't notice the trailer until we drove a little past it, so we didn't get a great photo on the way. And as usual, they decided to drive by, turn around, and take a picture on the way back. Apparently, someone saw us on the way. It was a very country road and not even a road in this area, to be honest, as it turned to gravel a mile or two ago. In fact, I had to turn the car around by hitting an embankment and doing a 32-point turn to avoid going into a ditch. However, as I was turning around, my buddy said, "Hey, look." I look, and 3 people are walking from the forest to the road. Just people, no big deal. At that point, I backed the car out of the way, and that's when I noticed they had guns. A young, hideous guy was holding a baseball bat. A nasty-looking older guy had a shovel. Both were shirtless, and then there was the screaming girl. Something clicked in my head, and in the driveway, as my partner took the photo, I heard a girl scream. It was an angry shout, but I couldn't make out what was said. I didn't even know where it came from, and I certainly didn't think the shout was directed at us, but apparently it was. These people were now walking with intent towards my stalled car, and I kept wondering if this was really going to happen. And what exactly is happening even? My partner went a little crazy and convinced me that they were going to attack us. It's hard to explain what goes through your head at that moment because I couldn't believe what I was actually seeing. And in the end, the only thing I could think of was to hit them with the car like in Grand Theft Auto, or you die. They were shouting and waving their weapons and closing in, and I was running out of time. I revved the little engine of my red Pontiac Grand Prix, hoping to scare them off, then let off the gas. I rushed towards them with the fury of all 6 cylinders, or 4. I don't remember how many there were. Luckily for them, they jumped out of the way at the last minute as I grazed near them, throwing gravel and dirt everywhere. Once we were a safe distance away, I braked and looked around. Fortunately, they are gone. Unfortunately, we were again too far from the trailer to get a good photo. I explained this to my boss when I emailed her my day's collection of real estate photos, and she seems to understand. And after that, I kept it loaded, 45 in the glove box, and felt much more confident while doing his job. I actually quit smoking after a couple of years because it was too dangerous, even when I was hot. This happened last year, and just thinking about it still gives me goosebumps. I was leaving work and heading to my friend's house. My work is literally on the edge of the city. It's quite rural here, and it gets really dead at night. My friends live even further from my work in what you think is rural, and the roads get emptier the closer you get to home. One day I got off work and went to my car and called my friend to talk to her about something on the phone while I was driving to her and her boyfriend's house. I looked both ways before pulling out of the parking lot, but there was absolutely no one on the road that I could see. It was quite a distance. I drove a mile or so down the road when I can see the headlights behind me, and they are coming fast. It was a full-size pickup truck that had been jacked up, and it came so close to my car that all I could see out my back window was the Chevy badge on its grill. I thought he was trying to pass me, so I waved my hand out the window for him to drive down the suicide lane since the road was only 2 lanes. But instead, he started laying on the horns. Mind you, I'm not a slow driver. I was already doing 55 in 45, so I wasn't bothering him with my speed or anything. I tell my friend what's going on, and she tells me to keep going and that he'll probably leave me alone. But he stays glued to me for at least another mile or so, honking every now and then. Eventually it started turning on the lights for a few seconds, and then started to slow down until we were several hundred feet apart. And then he would get up on the floor to take off very quickly after me, as if pretending to rear me. At this point, I get more sketchy, and my friend tries to calm me down and tells me to keep going. I was very afraid that he would hit me, and I wanted to run. But there were no open businesses so far from the city. In fact, there were no more open spaces, just fields and a few houses now and then. I decided to pull over and try to pass him, figuring that my Corolla might not be a Formula One car. But heck, it's a lot faster than the old pickup, and I'd be able to cover some distance. I'm up to 85 and keeping an eye on him, and he didn't seem to try to catch up. I felt a little safer and assumed he had given up, so I dropped to about 60 and told my friend it worked and he was done. I still had tunnel vision from the adrenaline and didn't realize he was flying behind me again until he was coming towards me at maybe 85 or 90. I realized he wasn't going to slow down, so I braced myself and told my friend that he was going to rear-end me, but instead he went around me, missing my car by just a few inches, and flew in front of me. He cut right in front of my car and slammed on the brakes, trying to get me to go behind him. I managed to stop in time, and he slowly moved forward. He stopped repeatedly on the road for several miles, almost like he was baiting me to pass him. My friend told me that her boyfriend had been on the phone with the police and kept them informed, and that I should continue to talk to her on the phone. After a while, I saw my friend's traffic sign, and she kept assuring me that she and her boyfriend were outside waiting for me to pull up, and that the police were on their way. She also told me to pull into the driveway and stay in the car until they were sure it was gone. He made what should have been a 10-second drive to the street a painstaking process because he kept stopping in front of me. And the next part was my fault because I instinctively put on my turn signal, which let him know I was about to turn onto the road, and so he immediately pulled over the curb to cut in front of me again. My friend's house is on the corner, so she and her boyfriend were able to see everything now, but I had a few ways to go before I actually got to her driveway. This time, the truck was in the middle of the road and it wasn't moving, so I tried to go around it. As soon as I started to go around it, it fell to the floor and went to the left, almost hitting me in the front and completely blocking the road. However, now I felt braver. I knew help was on the way and my friends were there, so I laid down on the horn, shouted a few choice words, and told him to move his ass. My friend and her boyfriend had by then come to the edge of the property where we were. and I guess the driver noticed them and slowly started to move out of my way. I pulled into the driveway as fast as I could and looked in my rearview mirror to see him slowly pull into the driveway where he stopped. I couldn't see his features because it was so dark, and he was too far away, but I could tell he was looking at me the whole time. My friends got to my car just as he got to the driveway, and I watched my friend walk up to the truck. I heard her say, "You need to leave now. The cops are coming." And they stared at each other for a few seconds before he slowly continued. Her neighborhood is a giant loop and he never came out. So we were feeling adventurous and snuck around the block looking for where he went while we waited for the cops. We found the truck parked outside the house and returned as soon as the police arrived. We told the cops where the truck was, and the officer came back to tell us the door wasn't answered and he must have left. Neither her boyfriend, who had lived there forever, nor his mother recognized either the truck or the person. And if I remember, his mother even knew the people who lived in the house where the truck was parked. And as far as I know, he was never seen again. Now, since I'm a very small woman who was alone at almost midnight, we all assume he was watching me leave work and tried to get me to crash the car so I'd stop, and he could potentially kidnap me or something. We believe that once he realized the cops were involved, he parked the truck in someone's empty driveway and probably left it there to hide in a nearby field until the cops left the area. I was 16 at the time and dealt with some sad characters for sad reasons that I won't go into. However, I had two friends that I was very close to at the time who were basically my guides on the street because I was pretty much a sheltered jerk up until then. Anyway, one night we were at a club drinking and dancing. Great night, went well, ended up meeting this boy my age. He was 18 years old, studying medicine, hot as hell. I just couldn't resist. I was very drunk when I made this decision, and I was separated from our designated driver at the time. I said yes clearly like the horned idiot that I was, and moments later I was in his car doing some things while he drove me back to his place. We pulled up to a house that I would at best recognize as a red flag house. A 2-story sunken podium built into the hillside. I feel like I'm over 200 years old. You know, it looks terrible. He turns the car off and tells me to wait there while he gets there to clean up and get ready. I agreed and he rushed inside. I waited for what seemed like an hour and a half, and finally I got tired of waiting and left and went up the hill to the window. Inside, I could hear all kinds of glass clattering and moving, as well as several animals. Now I was still expecting some things to happen that night, so I figured a little peeking out the window wouldn't hurt. But instead of bare chest muscles and body oil, I saw him carrying a pile of old bottles and a handcart to another room down the hall. I was curious, and my condition was starting to improve, so I ran around the house to another window. There I saw hundreds of the same jars standing on the shelves and lying on the floor. The closer I looked, the jars all seemed to have animal parts and maybe even fruit, which kind of made sense to me considering he said something about wanting to be a vet at some point. I realize now that I rationalized it all in a drunken state that could have killed me if I hadn't been so curious. Anyway, he was coming back, so I rushed to the car and waited, pretending to be more drunk than I was at the moment. He got me out of the car and we started making out right then and there. Then he started walking me towards the house. At this point, I began to dread the preliminary information I had begun to process. But he continued to physically push me towards the house, and I pretended to trip and pushed him away. But he just grabbed my shoulders and kept pushing harder. But I was sober enough to be scared. We went inside, and the first thing I noticed was the smell of the house, like heavy chemicals and real shit. He again told me to wait there in the lobby. This time he was much stronger. He ordered it around the corner, and as soon as he did, I saw his kitchen through the living room shutters. There was blood and tarps and fur and feathers everywhere. And with that, I opened the door, slipped out and knocked over the pile of wood in front of me to close it, before taking off faster than I ever had in my life. I never really want to know what he was doing there. But the possibilities make me sick to my stomach. I've never gone out like that since, and I'm not going to do it again, so I'll give you some background on this. The house I live in now has an attic, and I've lived in this house for the last 8 years of my 13 years. One night, during a bad winter, when it rained all the time and the wind was strong, I heard boxes being moved in the attic. I was frightened and lay awake all night listening to these strange sounds coming from the attic. In the morning, I met my parents and asked if it was them. They both denied it and had no reason to go to the attic. They only go into it at Christmas because that's where we keep the tree, Christmas decorations, and things we don't use but don't want to throw away. I told them I heard a noise and they both brushed me off and claimed I was just hearing things. But the next night I heard the noises again. And the next night, and the night after that, all week long, I told my friends at school and they said that someone must be in the attic. I told them it was impossible. The only way into my loft is to grab a ladder from the shed in the garden, go into the house, and there is a hole next to the laundry room, which is next to my room, like a proper pit. I'm sorry, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's just like a hole with a panel covering it, and that's how you get into the attic. After that week, when the weather cleared up and I didn't hear any more noises from the attic, I just forgot about it until one day I forgot the key. I called my dad, who was at work at the time, and asked if there was a spare key hidden somewhere that I could use to get in. And he told me there was a way to get into the loft through the roof. He told me about a large panel on the roof that could be removed and allowed access to the attic. It was pretty easy to get on the roof, and my younger brother did it many times with ease to save our cat or swords that ended up there. But my blood ran cold because someone could get into the attic and someone could be in our attic for a week. And then a dark thought crossed my mind. What if he's still in that attic? I was very sleepy and instead spent 3 hours walking around the neighborhood waiting for my dad to come home. And when he did, I told him again about the week I heard the noise in the attic and how he was able to get in there. And again he just brushed it off. The next few years were filled with the occasional terrifying moment. For example, I have 2 glass doors in my room that go out to the backyard, and I have motion sensor lights in the garden. One night when I was sleeping, my dog was sleeping next to me with his back to the glass door. My room was suddenly flooded with light, which meant that someone or something was in the garden. I didn't really think about it. Maybe a stray cat, I thought. But just then my dog started growling. He is a very sweet and timid dog who is actually bullied by our kitty, and I kind of froze at that. I had never heard him roar before, and then I heard a knock on the glass door. Honestly, I wanted to cry because I was horrified that if whoever is knocking on the glass wants in, the glass isn't going to stop them. The knocking continued for several more minutes. I lay still, pretending to be asleep. Then I heard the doorknob being checked, and then my dog started barking, very deep and menacing. And whoever it was, they ran away. I stayed up all night. I was afraid that he would come back, and in the morning Dad shouted at me because the dog barked and woke him up. I cried and told him what happened, and again he just didn't believe me. Another time we changed the locks because my brother lost his wallet with the keys and our address was in his wallet. By the way, later he was found at his mother's. My dad gave me a new key for the front door, and I put it on the bed and went shopping with my dad and brother. And when I came back, he was gone. I looked everywhere and just couldn't find it. As a result, I took the spare key that my father had hidden in the garden and pretended that it was my main one. Later, he put another key in the garden, which was hidden under my dog's bed. It is also important for later. Other things happened, but I think I've given enough backstory. That was about 2 months ago. So my dad sometimes goes to work, and when he does, my brother stays with their mom, and I take care of the house and the animals. My father was gone for 5 days when this happened. I left my main computer on, and it was just on the Google homepage. I went to bed and woke up 2 hours later, and my stomach was killing me. I rushed to the bathroom and threw up. I made a bit of a mess. Yes, I went to the kitchen. I have an open, simple kitchen, so it's also a dining room and a small living room in this big room. The main computer is also in this room to grab the mop and bucket. And then I saw the computer screen on. Not dark, like when you don't touch your computer for a while, and the screen goes black. Interestingly, I went to look at it and saw that it was on YouTube, on a random music search page with music typed into the search bar. I was freaked out by it because I was like, what the hell? I clicked back and there were a few different pieces of music before going to the website of the university my brother was going to, and I took him to an open house just a few weeks ago. Then I clicked again and it went to my email. I will leave it in the system, and then it went to my university's homepage. I was extremely scared because all I thought was that someone was in my house, that they used my computer and went looking for all these things. But why? I quickly grabbed my knife and headed to the main living room, which is next to the front door. I called my best friend who lived 30 minutes away, and she told me she would pick me up. I ransacked the living room while talking to her on the phone and told her that if I screamed, the police should be called. And after making sure the living room was safe, I walked around just waiting for her. Also, my cats were scared and hiding, which they never do. When she arrived, we searched my house, and I was violently kicking the door open and screaming. If anyone was in the house, I would stab them, and that was it. But there was no one there. I was still scared, and my best friend told me I was spending the night with her at her house. I felt bad leaving my animals, but I couldn't bring them because she had dogs that didn't like cats and were sometimes aggressive with my dog. As we were leaving, one thought struck me. What if the person was in the attic? My best friend told me there was no way we ransacked the attic, and she grabbed me. I didn't call the police, and my dad came home the next day, and I told him what happened last night, and he laughed at me and again just brushed it off. But I believe that someone lives in my attic, or at least lived. I'm really scared to stay home alone at night, and I'll let you know if anything else happens. And I'm actually planning on moving out next year, so I guess that's good. Last night I was sleeping and had a terrible nightmare. I dreamed that something was climbing into my bedroom window, and my dad was shooting at it. He looked like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings, except he was bluish-gray and a bit more wrinkled. I wake up with a jolt and lie next to my boyfriend, my heart pounding in my chest. And as soon as I fall back into sleep, I hear something. I heard banging and banging on glass coming from the back deck, which is right outside my bedroom window. Someone or something, and I know how silly this sounds, was standing on my back deck banging on the glass door that leads to the kitchen. That door and the garage door in the kitchen were unlocked. We live in a small town in a very nice neighborhood, so we rarely lock our doors at night. But that's not exactly what scared me. I'm not a nervous or scared person, so normally I wouldn't have a problem getting up and checking it out without even bothering to wake the guy up. But what scared me was the absolute fear and terror I felt at that moment. I can't explain it, but it was the worst scare I've ever had. And I guess it's basically nothing, just a weird noise after a nightmare. Nothing to worry about. But it felt like a really big deal. It felt like I got out of bed to regret it, so that I could see what I couldn't help but see, which was very uncharacteristic of me. I mean, I'm pretty much fearless for most of these things. I was never afraid of the dark, even as a child. I certainly wasn't asleep, and it wasn't sleep paralysis, because my dog heard it too. He was sitting on the bed, ears pricked up, looking down the hall. He usually barked or at least growled, but he didn't seem to want to participate in whatever it was. But this dog is happy to bite off a piece from someone. He's a Jack Russell Terrier, so he's small, but he's a jerk enough that we have to lock him up when we have company because he bites. And he was practically crawling up my ass trying to get away from that door. I only heard it for a minute, but it felt like forever. And then, just nothing. Total silence, as usual in the neighborhood at 4 in the morning. I shake my boyfriend and try to crawl under him. I'm so scared. But he doesn't wake up, which is unusual for him, I admit. He's not exactly a light sleeper or anything, but he had to wake up when I shook him. He doesn't remember hearing anything, and he doesn't remember me trying to wake him up. Yes, it could just be an animal, but only the top half of the door is glass, so it wouldn't be able to reach it. There is also nothing for the animal to climb or stand on to reach the glass. If it was a spoiler, why would they be knocking on the glass too? If it was a burglar, why didn't they enter the unlocked door? Why was my dog so scared, and why didn't my boyfriend wake up? And most importantly, why did it have to happen after such a terrible nightmare? We lived here for 15 years. RS and I have never heard that before, and this dream seemed more real than most of my dreams. Very disturbing. I just don't know how to describe the terror I felt lying there with that whining dog on top of me, knowing something was happening right outside my window. I have a lot of relatives in the UK, and I went there with my family for Thanksgiving 2012. I don't want to make it too long because it's honestly very traumatic, but I'll try to talk to it. So as we were sitting and eating, everyone started hearing this cry. There was a big window that looked out onto the front yard, and I saw balloons, so I thought it was someone's birthday. I ignored it, and as one Christian family, we began to pray. All was quiet until I heard the screams again, but I also heard this inhuman chanting, shouting and talking at the same time. It sounded like Russian mixed with German mixed with an Asian language, but with a very fast, robotic tone. I know that sounds weird, but honestly, that's the only way I can describe it. But it was a terrible sound, and I have never heard it before or since, and I just burst into tears. Mind you, I was about 6 years old at the time, but it was so faint that I thought it might just be the TV that was left on at some point. But my parents got up and rushed to the door, locked it, and didn't look at it. I was too curious to just give it up, so I got up and ran outside to look, and it was a big mistake. I looked around, there was nothing there, and at first I calmed down. But then something flew past, and it was not a man, and neither was his voice. He ran across the yard, and I started screaming. Even my dad screamed damn loud, and I've never heard him say it before, at least seriously. But then I noticed it. She walked like an old woman, but super fast. His arms were bent, and his steps were large and open. His skin was a dark green shade, and he had long gray hair. But from her face, she looked like an ordinary girl, probably the same age as me. But it was a little big, I admit, like a short big or a fat big, but everything about it was just abnormally sized. He wasn't wearing any clothes and wasn't holding anything, but that's all I saw. He didn't see me. He was just walking, and I looked around again to see if it was there, and it was gone. Now I admit that it is sincere. Could just be a birthday, and it was some sick fun, and I'm going to believe it until proven otherwise because I pray to God it's not true. I didn't want to talk about it until now, and I thought now is a good time to share it. However, the way I described it isn't as scary as it was to see it, because honestly, it's so hard to explain. It was disgusting, and it didn't just look like someone naked painted green. It was just a thing like nothing I'd ever seen, heard, or even read about. I really hope I never have to see this again. One winter night, I'm lying in bed watching TV with the remote control and mobile phone in hand. I was in the living room. My grandfather was sleeping on the bed next to the sofa. The other family members were sleeping upstairs. It was quiet. I was feeling tired, so I turned off the TV, texted my friends, locked my phone, and took a nap on the couch. It was around 3:30 a.m., and my phone told me that I had just received a message. I unlocked my phone and started reading the message. I saw something moving behind the phone screen. At first, I thought it was car lights and continued reading, but there were no cars passing by my house at the time. I turned my phone away and saw a huge cloud in the air, like a mass in front of a closed white door, very dark and kind of sparkling. It was large, thick, not transparent, and moved like a liquid. I locked eyes with him, and he started moving to the left and towards me. I panicked and screamed as loud as I could, grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. And as soon as I pressed the buttons on the remote, it just disappeared. I called my mom to come and get me because I was petrified and couldn't stop crying. I woke everyone up, and obviously no one believed me. To this day, I find that the event was so traumatic that I remember it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. But if you have any idea what it could be, if you've experienced something similar, please don't ignore this request and share your story or advice with me, because I'd love to know what it was. I work in a coffee shop, and I'm usually always the only person on shift, which means I open and close almost every day. Even though I'm in Baltimore, I was pretty remote and not too worried about anything happening. The other day, 2 guys who live across the street from my job came in and told me that an older man with a truck had sat and watched me at least 5 times in the last 2 weeks. He never stays for less than an hour, just sitting and watching. At first, they weren't sure who he was actually watching, but one day when he was there, I had to go to the store, and it was very obvious that he was watching me. It kind of scared me how much I ignored it. But last night, when the last customer left, there was a man standing outside the store waiting for them to leave. He matched the description the man had given me, so I was a little wary. He tried to get in as soon as he saw they were gone, and I was alone, so I thought fast and slammed the door and said it was locked. He became visibly frustrated and started asking if he could talk to me, that he couldn't hear me through the glass, and he just had this awful, almost excited look like a dog about to be fed. I told him no, that I had to close and he had to go. He started banging on the glass louder and louder, and I told him I was going to call the police and go get the phone, and when I looked back, I saw another store owner come to see if I needed help, and he was gone. I haven't seen him since then, but lately he's been hanging around a lot at my work. I have a taser and pepper spray, but I'm 5'2" and 100 pounds, and I don't know if I can defend myself well enough against a 200 pounds dude. I'm really scared. And I don't know what to do because I don't really want to be the subject of an episode of Investigation Discovery or something. So I worked for a short time as a housekeeper at a beach rental. Some of the houses were brand new and massive. Others were the original homes of early settlers who were able to stay in the family. I've probably felt the little things work in some of these houses. Just felt like I was being watched or that I wasn't alone in the house. But I can always shrug it off and laugh the fear away. Nothing ever happened to me to make me think there was actually something there. But then I was assigned to clean this old house, 2 stories, right on the shore. And right after I went inside, I heard shuffling from the back bedroom. I shouted who I was and all that, housekeeping. But no one answered, which was expected because no one should be there when I get there. But every now and then another housekeeper stops by to help and stuff. I quickly looked around and found that I was alone. So I just started on my tasks. Now the house is set up, so that on the lower floor there are 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, all close together and small. If you were in the bathroom, you would be looking down a very short hallway into the final bedroom, with the remaining 2 bedrooms along the hallway. The front door and stairs to the upper floor are parallel to the bathroom in an L shape. I'm just explaining the diagram so you can visualize it a little better, since I'm not going back there to take a photo. So I started downstairs in the bedrooms, pulling up all the sheets to wash. It constantly felt like someone was in the house with me. But again, I just brushed it off. I kept looking over my shoulder behind me without thinking about it, and the pit of my stomach kept growing and growing. I am very good at staying logical and calm, laughing at my fear. It was very bad. I just felt genuinely scared this time, and there was no reason to be. Still, the closer I got to the last bedroom, the lump in my throat grew. So I just left it alone and decided I would tackle it once I finished the kitchen, living room, and bathroom upstairs. Once I got upstairs, I felt a lot better, but I kept running for the stairs, although I could have sworn someone was standing below like they couldn't get up, just waiting. I say this because every time I looked, the slightest shadow moved like the top of my head was peeking into view. Once upstairs, I was able to calm down, put on some music, and leave. Once I was done, I was able to confidently go down again. But once I hit the bottom, I was just completely terrified. I froze with wide eyes, walking slowly and doing tasks quickly and quietly, looking back all the time. Eventually, I went into the back bedroom and walked around the bed to keep my eyes on the door. I was pulling the sheets and pillowcases, but I was doing it slower and slower. My anxieties left my fingers tense and trembling. Then a breeze blew into the room. Just under the bed it was cold and rushing to my feet, and then it was very cold just on one of my ankles. It was as if something had grabbed my leg, but it was made of cold air, and I didn't know what to do, how to jump from the bed onto the frozen step. Then I just rushed upstairs and sat on the top porch and shook until I calmed down. I forced myself to come up with any logical excuse for it because I really didn't want the ghost to be real and to have to deal with it right now. I was so scared I was ready to leave the house and call work, but I knew I was going to be fired and I really needed the money. So I calmed down and focused on finishing on top. I went into the bathroom and noticed that there was a painting, only to realize that there was no artwork in the entire house except for this piece. It was 2 women hanging from the windows, wearing period clothing, I think from the 1700s, and everything was painted black except for them and the windows. And looking closer at their faces, I saw contempt. One girl looked away angrily, the other was looking straight at me with a smile, and just plain evil eyes is the only way I can describe it. And then I noticed that everywhere I moved in the bathroom, her eyes followed me. I tried to clean the mirror and couldn't stop looking through it at the picture behind me. My senses told me to just leave the bathroom, and eventually I did. I couldn't even bring myself to even look at the closed bathroom door. I was so scared. And this fear that I describe, it was unlike any other feeling I had ever felt. It was imposed on me. All my senses are just painfully active. My body was screaming at me to hit rocks, but I had to finish at least the bare minimum, and I still had to make the beds and vacuum the floors, and I really couldn't lose this job. And I mean, how do I explain that I didn't finish because I was scared? No one would believe me. So I quickly run downstairs, make the beds, and finish. I go into the bathroom to wipe the mirror. I look in it and see the bedroom door behind me. And I swear to you, there was just a figure standing there, made entirely of shadow. Everything radiating from that figure also gave me goosebumps. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I even started crying without realizing it. I blinked after what felt like forever staring at it, and as soon as I did, it was gone. I turned towards whatever it was, but saw nothing. I stared into the bedroom for a few seconds, thinking about rushing to the door when I saw the vacuum cleaner still on, and I couldn't leave all my tools. All I had to do was grab it and load it, and the rest was taken care of. So I started shouting to gain courage. It made me feel a little better. Just a lot of false confidence, like, "Oh yeah, you little bitch," and stuff like that when I go in and wrap the cord. I look down, press the small back of the plug and part of the wire. Suddenly, in my upper periphery, I see someone in front of me, between the bedroom and the bathroom. I was so surprised by this that I immediately looked up and immediately saw a woman looking at me. She was just standing there in a nightgown that looked like a dress and was looking at me. My body began to vibrate with adrenaline. My heart was pounding, fear gripped my bones. I literally couldn't figure out what the hell I was looking at, but her eyes were just evil, and she wanted to hurt me, I think. And this thing stood between me and my exit from there. I looked at the vacuum cleaner again, with a quick thought to throw it at her when she just disappeared. I did not wait. I took this opportunity to run out the door, and when I did, I found it wouldn't open. At this point, I shake the doorknob and try to scream for help, but my throat whispers. I open and close. I kick, but he doesn't move. I rush upstairs and grab onto the sofa, staring wide-eyed at the stairs. Literally before my eyes, she came halfway, staring at me, looking angry. She sinks and disappears from view, as if her body is made of smoke of different thicknesses or something. Her face pales a little, and then her body, but she seems to stay there. I really didn't know what else to do but run out onto the porch next to me, hang off the balcony, and throw myself 7 feet down. And when I landed, I looked at the front door, and it was only partially open, as if inviting me back inside. I walked down the street for a bit, called a guy to come get me, and I just cried. When he came, I explained everything, and I think he wanted to believe me. But like me, there are logical answers to everything. There, I calmed down quickly with him, and we just went home. I quit on disability shortly after, but I ended up telling my supervisor while I was still there that I wasn't going to work at that house anymore. And she said I wasn't the only one complaining about feeling terrible in that house. I didn't tell her what I saw because I didn't want her to think I was crazy, and it made me wonder who else was cleaning it and saw something but didn't say anything other than they felt terrible. I still sometimes have nightmares about this picture. I mean, why was it the only one, and who made it? How old was it? I hate seeing them dead staring at my dreams, and it's been a year since then. I can also promise you guys that I have never felt so scared, and I still can't explain everything that happened that day. About a year ago, I was in a very dark place spiritually and emotionally. I rarely prayed, and there were so many insecurities, worries, and problems in my life that it was difficult for me to live each day. It was during this period of my life that I started waking up to these black figures in my room almost every night. I don't remember when it started, but I remember the scariest nights to this day. They usually appear near or at the end of my bed, sinister and blacker than black. I've never had sleep paralysis, and I've never had anything like these things in my room, but I've seen them anyway. In fact, it got so bad that I had to sleep with a flashlight next to my bed, because the only way to get rid of them was to quickly shine a torch on them when I woke up. Now, Usually I'd wake up to one in my room going crazy on its own. But one night, I woke up to find 3 of them all around my bed, all the same height and all facing me, not moving or talking, just watching behind me. Now all this can be explained rationally, right? Overly active imagination or just half asleep? Well, I have 2 reasons why I believe these things are very real. So one night I woke up to see a little one like a baby at the end of my bed, and for some reason I was not afraid. I think it's because I was still awake, but I never talked to these things. But that night I did. I just said, "I can see you looking at this." And the most terrible thing happened. He started moving towards my desk and was literally standing behind my desk like he was trying to hide. And my other reason is that earlier this year some missionaries came over for dinner, and I asked them to bless the house and our family. And after that I didn't see any more in my room. Many may call it a coincidence, I know, but I don't think it was. I think these things were very real and got rid of something I'm not telling any of my family because I think they're scared, to say the least, and I don't want to scare them. Besides, I'm not sure anyone will believe me. So I was about 13 when it happened. My mom's birthday was coming up, and I didn't know what to get her, so I called my aunt for help. We arranged to meet in town on a Saturday afternoon after my piano lesson to take our time. I went to my piano lesson as usual, dropped my books at home, and went to the bus stop to catch a bus into town. While I was waiting, a taxi pulled up. The driver rolled down the window and called, "Hey, are you going so-so? I'll give you a ride." Without approaching the taxi, I replied that I could not afford a taxi, and besides, the bus would be in a minute. It was, as usual, late. However, the taxi driver insisted that I get into his taxi and that he would not charge me for the trip to the city. I stood my ground, refusing to get in, but his tone became more aggressive as he demanded that I get into his cab within the next minute. At the bus stop, someone else pulled up, and the taxi driver ran away, cursing at me for not getting into the taxi. I told my aunt what happened when I met her in town, and she asked if I had his license number so she could report the incident. I explained that I didn't want to go near the taxi to find out the number, and that at first I thought he was just looking for a fare. My aunt is almost sure that if I got into that taxi, then I wouldn't be dropped off in town but taken somewhere else, and she told me the next time it happens to tell them to get lost, or I'll scream, and if they get close, try to run away. For most of my childhood, my dad and my stepmom lived in this house that was built in the 50s, and made me dread having to stay there every weekend night. Most of the nights I stayed there, I would wake up at some point in the night and hear either symphonic orchestral music coming from downstairs or something that sounded like monks chanting. It scared me so much that I couldn't even get up to go and wake up my father. I just lay there, paralyzed with fear. However, one day when I was a teenager, my stepmother briefly and casually told me that she could see spirits. She and my father are incredibly religious, so it's not something she likes to talk about. She doesn't want to see them, and unfortunately for her, she's a realtor, so she sees them a lot, as I'm sure you can imagine. Anyway, she tells me that she often sees the spirit of an old man and a little boy in our house, but not necessarily together. There are a lot of other little things going on in this house as well. Like, I remember my very level-headed aunt being afraid of our dining room and/or dinner table for some reason she never revealed. I remember one day my father came downstairs and found a literal pile of dirt in front of the laundry room door in the closet, and had no idea how I got there. We also had ADT, and our alarm would sometimes go off in the middle of the night without explanation. One day my stepmother was home alone in the office at the back of the house on the first floor, and it always gave everyone goosebumps. She hears a noise from the living room. There were 3 stacks of DVDs on top of the TV, and the stack of DVDs that was in the middle of the room, and hit the floor so hard that the flap in the middle that holds the discs was knocked out of the case. One day my dad is home alone and leaves to run a quick errand. He was gone for 20 minutes, and when he returned, the inside of the garage window was swarming with flies that had definitely not been there before. One night I woke up and heard what sounded like a small bouncing ball being gently tossed down the stairs. I went back to sleep that night and never mentioned it again. But a few weeks later, my best friend Josie sleeps over and we're sleeping downstairs in the less used living room in the big house, and she wakes me up and tells me she heard what sounded like a bouncing ball in the foyer. I'm sure there's more that I can't remember, but all of this, as you can imagine, really scared me. It happened about a year and a half ago, and it was around 3 a.m. in the Houston area, one of the biggest sex trafficking cities, on a weekday night. My friend and I were driving and stopped at a Walgreens that I don't remember. I just got out of the car to go into the store and saw a white van parked outside. I thought nothing of it at the time. So after I make my purchase, I go back to my friend's car and off we go. However, as we were leaving the park, she said her tire pressure light came on, so we needed to stop to get air. For whatever reason, we stopped at the most ridiculous or secluded gas station to vent, and it was also closed. Dumbest decision I know, but we both got out of the car to get some fresh air, and it was a minute before I started feeling this rush of intuition screaming at me that it was time to leave. Following my instincts, I tell my friend that she and I should leave because I didn't have a good feeling about it. She agrees and cleans the air pump, and I kid you not, as she was pulling on the hose, the same white Walgreens van pulled up to us at that gas station. It all happened so fast, but I was yelling at my friend to get in the car and jump out. When we jumped in the car, the door of the van opened so fast and out came these huge men. Thank goodness we got to the car in time, because if we had waited just another 30 seconds, chances are I wouldn't be writing this. We pulled out of the gas station, and sure enough, the van followed us until we eventually lost it. I have many theories about the situation, but one of them is that they may have been sex traffickers and spotted me at Walgreens as an easy target. I'm a markedly effeminate gay man and decided to track down me and my friend, who is actually a girl. However, one thing is certain. I know that their intentions were not good at all. Be careful out there, hey. Ghostbusters was a new show when I was younger. Me and my friend would hang around the local rink and put up AZ flags and summon spirits for fun. The first night was something I will never forget. The first night we saw that the soda can rise and hang in the air for a second and then fall. Next to the rink is a barn with a garage door. Something knocks on the door. A light comes on inside. The only way in was the side door or the garage door, neither of which was open. We started telling other people about it, and the next thing you know, people were coming to the woods, to Buffalo Park, next to the ice rink, just to summon the spirits. We saw full-body apparitions with red eyes. All 3 people saw a little girl turn into a wolf and run away into the pitch darkness at the same time, and we had several people with us when we saw yellow glowing eyes and heard a drum come towards us, and at the end it sounded like someone knocked. Drum right in front of us, and everyone just ran away in fear. Some wild stuff for sure. I know it's hard to get others to believe my stories, so I hardly tell them, but I know the truth, and my friends know the truth too. But anyway, years later, I went through a religious phase and became a Christian after getting my life together. And when I was praying in my living room one day, my bedroom was scattered. I heard them calling me, reminiscent of a chorus. I had some sort of demonic hissing in my ear that made me gasp after I prayed to God to help me with my strange encounters. And it stopped after that and didn't pick up for another 2 years. So I was with my girlfriend at the time and was sleeping in my room when I woke up lying on my side, and I saw something like black strips of fabric with a smoky texture above my girlfriend. Half awake, I reached for her and shook her, then rolled over to see what looked like the Grim Reaper on my ceiling. It was a large hooded figure, pitch black, smoky texture, but you could see the outline of her body, like her arms, head, and torso. His robes moved like they were alive. It's really hard to explain, but I felt like every part of this thing was kind of alive, like some kind of energy that you could feel. He leaned down as if trying to get a better look at me, and at that moment I lost him. My body automatically started screaming louder than I ever had before, and I couldn't stop it. The feeling of fear I felt that day was the most surreal feeling I could ever explain. It was just a horrible feeling that I had. This My girlfriend woke up in the middle of my screams and she saw it too and completely shut down, crying and hiding under the covers while I screamed uncontrollably, "Go away!" It was like my brain knew what to do, but my body started screaming and I just watched. And eventually I passed out, I think from fear. However, passing out was unusual because I was on a plane that had an engine failure and almost crashed into trees, and the fear I felt from that, thinking I was going to die for sure, was still even close to feeling scared, which this thing evoked in me. It was like my soul was afraid of it or something, not just my body and mind. Anyway, after that encounter, we had our doors open by themselves after waking up at 3 a.m., and that was the end of it for quite a while. Fast forward, I live in an apartment with my daughter and her mother. During the time that we have been together, not much unusual has happened to us. The only weird thing that happened to us was that we both woke up at 1:20 a.m. when my girlfriend was pregnant and her water broke a few minutes later. I think it was just a weird coincidence, but it's probably worth mentioning. But that night, I woke up to see a dark figure rising from the space between our closet and the door. Thinking I was only half awake and still dreaming, I just shrugged. The next day, my girlfriend and I come home, and we start hearing a serious knocking on the bathroom door while we are in the living room watching TV. I rush to see why my girlfriend is making so much noise, and we meet in the hallway. She was disappointed, asked why I was scaring her so much. I told her I just got up to see what the noise was all about, and she looked at me startled and then told me she didn't believe me, and we got into a short argument about it. But the next night, I'm awake in bed next to her, and we're both on our phones when we hear what sounds like someone rummaging through our kitchen drawers. The sound of silverware rattling around and a wooden drawer sliding open was enough to make me get up and grab my Mossberg and my girlfriend to call the police. I turn on the lights and look for potential intruders, and when I get to the kitchen, it's all clear, but the kitchen drawers are open, which is very strange. I turn on the light, and the light in the living room too, and nothing. I check my daughter's playroom in the bathroom and everything is clear. I understand that the windows are not open and the front door is still closed and not bypassed. I tell my friend to tell the dispatcher that there was no break-in. They tell her, and they still want to send an officer to follow up, but we decline and tell the woman on the phone that we will call if needed. We make sure the house is clean one last time, talk about what happened, and finally go to bed. This morning I woke up with my girlfriend and we started our day as usual by heading to the kitchen to start our daughter's breakfast. Now everything is open, drawers and cabinets. Nothing is thrown out. Nothing is taken or destroyed. We both know something is wrong and we are looking for what we can do. My girlfriend found a shop that sells crystals and all that other shit, and we get something called Hollywood and candles. We are instructed to light candles when the Hollywood is burning and pray as we walk around the room with the Hollywood burning. As for this point, I haven't seen or heard anything, but I'm 100% sure that something attached itself to me at some point. All I hope is that this is the end and that I am finally out of it. I work for a busy company in Orlando, right in the heart of iDrive. If you're not familiar with the area, it's short for International Drive, which stands for Tourist Central. This meant that I tended to work a lot of nights, which my husband never liked. A few of my colleagues had strange events in our car park, so we always left after 10 p.m. with another person. So we had someone with us when we walked to our car. And we women definitely took care of it. In particular, that night I closed the shop around 1:30 a.m. and walked to my car. With one hand I waved my colleague good evening, and with the other I was already dialing my husband's number. Even though we lived only 25 minutes from my work, we both liked to call each other when we left, wherever we were, to let the other know of our expected arrival. Also, in the evenings when I was closing, it was nice to tell him about the night's adventures, current gossip, and other things. This is also a good time to mention that I used to live in a not-so-nice part of Orlando. When I moved there to study, we moved into one of the cheapest apartments we could find, which incidentally meant moving into the ghetto. All in all, I don't really mind it. Our neighbors have been nice and the apartment is still affordable. But anyway, as I continued on my way home, I started complaining about my long shift and the fact that I wouldn't be home until 2 a.m. I turned into a regular lane that connected two state roads, and right at the end of that road was my compound. This road usually took about 8 minutes and went through a rundown area, but I always felt a little nervous turning down it because it was my last turn, which meant I was almost home. So I'm driving down this windy, empty road when out of the corner of my eye I spot another car moving. As I mentioned earlier, this road ran through a neighborhood that also had an endless number of side roads that led to loops and circles dotted with houses. It's very dark, lit only by headlights and dim streetlights. But I could see a van coming out of one of the side streets, not even 15 feet in front of me. And this next part happened so fast that I had no idea how to react. I see shadows inside the van, in the passenger and driver seats. Suddenly, a man with a gun is hanging from the passenger side window. He fires several shots straight into the corner house, right next to me at this point. My heart is sinking and all I can say is, damn it. My husband is still on the phone with me and also heard the gunshots. He frantically asks what happened, and if I'm okay, and all I can mutter is that I just saw a drive-by. As I pass the house where the shooting took place, the driver of the van pulls out into the road I'm driving on and flies right behind me. At this moment, my heart is pounding. The attackers are right behind me, the only vehicle on the road and the only witness to their crime. I tell my husband they are after me, and he quickly talks me down and tries to calm me down, but my eyes can't stop going between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. The van behind me wobbles back and forth on the road, falls a few feet behind me, and then climbs back up onto the bumper. I say out loud that I don't know what to do, and my husband tells me that if they keep following me, I should go to our local police department. Then suddenly out of nowhere, the driver turns left and down the road deep into the neighborhood, leaving me alone on the road. I was home a few minutes later, and my husband was just as shocked as I was, saying he could still hear the gunshots on the other end of the phone, waiting what seemed like forever for me to say something and tell him what happened. I saw the police the next morning when I went to work, but I never learned how violent and deadly the shooting was. I have since moved out of the area and hopefully never again have to witness a drive 8 minutes from my house. So this happened literally about 5 minutes ago, and I'm still outside in my pajamas because I'm just too scared to go back in the house. I live in an old house, and it seems like I've been here for about 2 years, and since I moved in, a lot has happened to me, my OH, and other people who have visited or stayed. Things like touching you, footsteps, things moving, falling, turning lights on and off, shadows and voices. So many things made me leave, but I'm just broke and can't afford it. But in any case, there is no one in the house but me, and I just hang the laundry in the utility room. I grab a laundry basket to hang my socks and walk about halfway to the kitchen when I hear a commotion in the utility room behind me. I don't know how to describe it other than a deep, growling scream. Whatever it was amazing and loud, and I've never heard anything like it in my life. I wish I could explain it better, but I just don't know how. It was just a strange and scary noise. I just froze like a deer caught in the headlights, and turned and stared at the door and backed up until I hit the front door and ran out into the garden. And now I sit here, half ashamed of running away and terrified of what the hell I'm dealing with in my own home. And I'm terribly aware that I'm here alone for another 8 hours. I think now that I can remember how to breathe, I'll have to go and do some research. Wish me luck. I have had many paranormal experiences in my life. None of them were too terrible, even though they seemed that way at the time. But one event really stuck with me more than the others. So I didn't have many friends growing up, and I spent more time with my cousins than anyone else. We always spent the night at my house. We watched movies and ate snacks, and eventually everyone passed out in the living room. It happened when I was about 8 years old. I was sleeping on one of the couches. My younger cousin was on the floor next to me. The other two were on the other side of the room. And I woke up in the middle of the night to my closest cousin's cough. More like he was even gasping. And I rolled over and turned to look down at him when he saw some thing in the dark. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but after watching for a few moments I could clearly make out a figure from the light in the hallway. This thing, whatever it was, looked skeletally thin and wasn't quite wearing a cloak, but more like a hooded shawl, and looked very, very old. He looked like he would fall apart if I even touched him, and he was kneeling over my cousin while he continued panting as if he was very interested in him. And then it saw me. The figure immediately stepped back, and when it rose, it must have been nearly 8 feet tall because it practically reached the ceiling. He walked slowly into the dining room, and my cousin stopped the coffee. I sat there huddled in the covers, feeling like I was being watched for the rest of the night, and stayed that way until dawn when the sun came out, and I knew for sure the thing was gone. I never felt safe in the house after that, and there must have been a lot of things going on there, but this was by far the scariest. Everyone I told this to wrote it off that you were probably just dreaming or thinking you saw something. But I was awake, and I know what I saw. I just have no idea what it was. This experience took place in Nepal in June, and is going to be quite a long one, so buckle up. I went there with only 6 other students, all of whom were girls from my college, to do a volunteer internship there, near the main city of Kathmandu. We were all 20 and 21 years old. I think the whole trip was 6 weeks, but we finished the internship in 5. So we planned to just go do whatever we wanted for the last week. We ended up taking a 7-hour bus ride to Pokhara, which is one of the most touristy cities in the country. Many Himalayan treks actually start from there, and it's also a popular spot for paragliding. A beautiful area of the city where travelers stay is called Lakeside, because there is a huge lake there. We stayed in a decent quality hotel in the area for 6 nights for only $50 equivalent. For the record too, overall, it is a very safe country, albeit a very poor one, and never once, apart from this experience, did I feel unsafe.